The gleaming diplomatic vessel Earthrise drifted into the ornate docking bay of Hegemony Station Prime, its blue and white hull reflecting the ambient light. Captain Jum Kim straightened his uniform and took a deep breath. This was a historic moment, the fourth official meeting between humans and the galactic hegemony. The air pressure changed slightly as the airlock cycled open. Jun stepped forward, his shoulders back and head high. Before him stood an alien delegation unlike anything Earth had imagined before first contact. The leader was a tall, insectoid creature with iridescent carapace and multiple limbs that moved with surprising grace. "Welcome, Terrans," the alien said, its mouthparts clicking and whistling, the words coming through their translators as smooth, neutral speech. "The Council awaits your delegation." Jun nodded politely. "We are honored to be here." Behind him, Dr. Hannah Park adjusted her grip on the case she carried. Inside were carefully selected cultural artifacts from Earth, music recordings, art reproductions, and literary works translated into the standard hegemony data format. Next to her, Ambassador Ta Li carried scientific data and technological schematics, a gesture of openness and trust. The humans followed their alien guides through vast corridors. The station was enormous, easily 10 times the size of humanity's largest space habitat. The walls seemed to shift colors subtly as they walked, responding to either light or perhaps the mood of those passing by. They entered a grand reception hall where the ceiling soared at least 30 meters high. Crystalline structures hung from above, breaking light into rainbows that danced across the floor. Around the room, beings of various shapes, sizes, and biological compositions mingled in small groups. Some floated in special atmosphere bubbles, others moved on many legs, and a few seemed to shimmer in and out of solid form. 27 species, Hannah whispered to Jun, excitement clear in her voice. All part of the hegemony for thousands of years according to the briefing data. Jun watched as the aliens turned to observe the human delegation. Some moved closer, clearly curious. "They seem friendlier than during our first contact," Hannah noted. Jun nodded. "Let's hope that's a good sign." The next 3 days passed in a whirlwind of meetings, presentations, and cultural exchanges. The humans were housed in special quarters adapted to Earth-like conditions. The beds were surprisingly comfortable, the food palatable despite being synthesized to human nutritional specifications. On the third night, Jun fell into a deep sleep, exhausted from the diplomatic marathon. The shrill sound of alarms tore him from rest. He sat up, disoriented, as his quarters blazed with flashing red light. The door slid open and Lieutenant Dao Choi burst in, already in uniform, his face pale. "Sir, we have an emergency." Day's voice shook. "The hegemony fleet has entered Sol's system. They're attacking our orbital defenses." Jun leaped from bed, pulling on his uniform. "What? That's impossible. We're in the middle of peace talks." They rushed to the communications center where the rest of the Earth delegation had gathered. On the main view screen, a tactical display showed the Sol system. Red icons representing hegemony warships moved toward Earth. Blue icons, Earth's defensive platforms and ships, winked out one by one. "This can't be happening," Ambassador Lee whispered, his hands gripping the edge of the console. A final communication had come through before the attack. "The Hegemony Council has unanimously declared humans a destabilizing element in galactic politics." "What does that mean?" Hannah asked. "It means they were never interested in peace," Jun said grimly. "They see us as a threat." The station suddenly shifted to high alert status. Through the walls, they heard the heavy footsteps of security forces approaching. "They're coming for us," Daz said, drawing his sidearm. Standard protocol would be to detain or eliminate diplomatic personnel at the outbreak of hostilities. Jun made a quick decision. "We need to warn Earth about what's happening. Daz, secure the door. Everyone else, help me access the communication array." They worked frantically as sounds of approaching guards grew louder. Hannah and Ta barricaded the entrance using furniture, while Day took position, weapon ready. I've bypassed their security, said one of the technical officers. We have a direct channel to Sol System Defense Command, but it won't last long. June activated the transmission. This is Captain Jun Kim. Earth is under attack. The hegemony has betrayed us. Their fleet has entered the system and is engaging our defenses. Activate Protocol Thermopyla. I repeat, activate. The door exploded inward in a shower of metal and plastic. Alien security forces poured through the opening, firing weapons that discharged bolts of blue plasma. Day returned fire, dropping 2 of the attackers, but there were too many. A plasma bolt struck the communication console, sending sparks flying. Another hit the wall near June's head as he ducked behind an overturned table. Keep transmitting, he shouted, not knowing if the link was still active. Across the room, Hannah cried out as she was hit. Ambassador Lee tried to reach her, but was caught in crossfire. The room filled with acrid smoke and the smell of burning equipment. June felt a strange calmness descend as he realized none of them would likely survive. He stood, drawing the attackers' attention from his remaining crew members. Why? He demanded of their attackers. Why betray peaceful contact? The lead security officer, a reptilian being with scaled armor, paused briefly. Your species evolves too quickly, adapts too readily. In 1,000 years, you would dominate us all. The council voted for preventative measures. A final volley of plasma fire engulfed the room. June's last thought was of Earth, wondering if his warning had gotten through. On Earth, people looked up at the night sky as it blazed with the light of orbital battles. Within hours, hegemony warships positioned themselves over major cities and military installations. The bombardment began without warning or mercy. Millions died in the first wave. Buildings crumbled, infrastructure collapsed, and panic spread. But even as humanity reeled from the surprise attack, resistance was already forming. Protocol Thermopyla, the emergency plan for alien invasion, activated worldwide. The war for humanity's survival had begun. And despite the hegemony's overwhelming advantage, they would soon learn why humans were considered dangerous, not just for their potential, but for their fierce determination when fighting for their very existence. Red emergency lights cast eerie shadows across Titan Base Alpha. The underground facility, built beneath the surface of Saturn's largest moon, had become humanity's last major command center. Admiral Jin Park stood motionless before the large tactical display, her tired eyes scanning the holographic representation of the Sol system. 6 weeks had passed since the hegemony's surprise attack. Earth glowed red on the display, indicating enemy occupation. The blue dots representing human resistance were scattered and few. Jin hadn't properly slept in days. Dark circles underlined her eyes, and her uniform hung loosely on her frame. Still, her voice remained steady as she spoke. Status report. Commander Su-Han stepped forward. His right arm was in a sling, a reminder of his narrow escape from Luna Base before it fell. Luna Base has fallen completely, he reported. Mars' defense platform continues to hold, but they report ammunition reserves at critical levels. They can't last more than 2 weeks without resupply. He swiped his good hand across the display, bringing up new information. Civilian evacuation to the deep space habitats is at 78% completion. We're prioritizing children and those with technical skills. Jin nodded slowly. Casualties. Sue's face tightened, estimated at 300 million on Earth. Another 2 million in orbit and Luna. The command room fell silent. Jin allowed the weight of those numbers to settle before continuing. And project adaptation. Where do we stand? Dr. Min Kim looked up from his console. Before the war, he had been the head of the Korean Advanced Neuroscience Institute. Now he led the desperate scientific effort that might save what remained of humanity. We've made a breakthrough, Admiral, he said, his voice carrying a hint of excitement. The neural interface tests are showing remarkable results. He pressed a button, and a new display appeared, showing brain scan comparisons. Human pilots, when directly linked to their vessels through our interface, can process combat information 5 times faster than hegemony systems. It's our neural architecture. Our brains are simply more adaptable than alien technology. Jin felt a flicker of hope for the first time in weeks. How soon can we deploy? 2 weeks for the prototype squadron, Min replied. But there's a problem. We need technical data on hegemony shield frequencies to fully exploit this advantage. Without it, even our faster response time won't be enough against their defenses. Jin studied the holographic display again. The large red icon hung in Earth orbit, the hegemony command carrier directing occupation forces. Then we get that data, she said finally. Commander Han, prepare Strike Team Omega. We're going to hit the hegemony command carrier. Su looked startled. Admiral, with respect, that's suicide. The carrier is protected by their most advanced defensive systems. We don't have the firepower to breach them. I'm not planning a frontal assault, Jin clarified. This is a stealth mission. In and out with the data we need. Over the next 3 days, Strike Team Omega prepared for what most considered a suicide mission. Their plan was ambitious but straightforward. A small stealth craft would approach the hegemony carrier. A boarding team would infiltrate, steal the shield frequency data, and extract, if possible. On the eve of the mission, Lieutenant Jumbly approached Admiral Jin in the planning room. Unlike many of the military personnel at Titan Base, Jun had been a civilian pilot before the war, flying transport ships between Earth and Mars. Admiral, I've been reviewing the mission parameters, he said quietly. The approach vector won't work. Their patrol patterns have shifted. Jin frowned. Then the mission is scrubbed. We can't risk what's left of Strike Team Omega on. I have an alternative, Mom. Jun interrupted, pushing forward a datapad. A single stealth insertion pod. Just 3 of us. We can bypass their perimeter sensors if we time our approach with the debris field from Luna Base. Jin studied the plan. The debris field from the destroyed Luna Base was now a cloud of particles orbiting Earth. Using it as cover was clever, but incredibly dangerous. The survival odds are negligible, Lieutenant. Jun smiled tightly. Negligible isn't 0, Admiral, and humanity needs this data. Something in the young man's determination reminded Jin of her younger self. After a long moment, she nodded. Mission authorized. Choose your team. Jun selected Sergeant Kang Han, a former Special Forces operator, and technical specialist Young Kim, who had worked on hegemony systems before the war. The 3 prepared their stealth pod, a craft barely larger than a shuttle escape pod. The launch was conducted in total communications blackout. Jin watched from Titan Base as the tiny craft disappeared into the darkness of space, carrying with it perhaps humanity's last hope. For 3 days, there was no word. Most at Titan Base presumed the mission had failed. Jin refused to give up hope, keeping a channel open despite the risk of hegemony detection. On the 4th day, as Jin was reviewing contingency plans for evacuating Mars, a communications officer shouted across the command center. Admiral, we have an incoming transmission. It's Lieutenant Lee. The view screen flickered to life, showing Jun's face. He was bloodied, one eye swollen shut, but very much alive. Mission accomplished. Admiral, he reported, his voice weak but proud. We have the data. And more. 20 hours later, a damaged hegemony shuttle limped into Titan Base's hidden docking bay. Jun and Young emerged, supporting the injured Sergeant Kang between them. But they weren't alone. They had brought a prisoner, a hegemony science officer. The data they recovered exceeded all expectations. Not only did they secure the shield frequencies, but they also discovered a critical vulnerability in hegemony propulsion systems. Their engines relied on a quantum harmonization process that, if disrupted at precisely the right frequency, would cause catastrophic failure. They never expected anyone to figure this out, Young explained as she presented her findings to the command staff. Their technology has been unchallenged for so long, they've grown complacent. The captured science officer, after initial resistance, confirmed the vulnerability. Your species thinks differently, the alien admitted reluctantly. You see patterns we miss, connections we overlook. That's why the Council feared you. Admiral Jin ordered immediate implementation of the new data into Project Adaptation. Within days, the first squadron of Mirror-linked fighters began training simulations, using the propulsion vulnerability to defeat simulated hegemony vessels with minimal losses. For the first time since the war began, there was hope. As Jin watched the prototype squadron run through their drills, she allowed herself to imagine a future where humanity not only survived, but pushed back against their would-be conquerors. They thought we would break, she said quietly to Commander Sue as they observed the training. They don't understand humans very well, do they? Sue's grim smile was answer enough. The counterattack was coming, and the hegemony would soon learn exactly how dangerous cornered humans could be. In the grand hall of the captured United Nations building in Geneva, the hegemony commander paced back and forth. His six-limbed body moved with sharp, agitated motions. The translator device on his chest converted his clicks and whistles into human language as he addressed his subordinates. "How have these primitives evaded our patrols again?" he demanded. His upper limbs gestured wildly at the holographic display, showing the remains of their destroyed supply convoy. An entire supply convoy destroyed, and not a single human vessel detected. This is the third attack this week. The assembled alien officers shifted uncomfortably. None wanted to deliver more bad news to their already furious commander. The human resistance should be broken by now, the commander continued. We control their orbital systems. We occupy their major cities. Their military bases are destroyed. Yet these attacks continue. 50 meters below the meeting room, deep in a forgotten maintenance tunnel beneath the UN complex, Major Yun Choi sat quietly with his small team of resistance fighters. They huddled around a makeshift listening device, its sensors planted throughout the building weeks earlier. As the angry aliens' words came through their headphones, Un couldn't help but smile. The Lazarus ships got another one, he whispered to his team. Right under their noses. The Lazarus Project vessels were humanity's newest weapon. Stealth ships with revolutionary technology that made them invisible to hegemony sensors. Named after the biblical figure who rose from the dead, these ships symbolized humanity's refusal to accept defeat. One of Yun's team members, a young woman who had been a university student before the invasion, grinned back at him. If they're this angry about supply ships, wait until they find out what's happening near Europa. Meanwhile, in high orbit around Jupiter's ice-covered moon Europa, Captain Hyun Park stood on the bridge of the HSS Defiance. Through the view screen, she could see the moons of Jupiter hanging in the blackness of space. More importantly, she could see the hegemony battle group, 5 heavy warships that had been dispatched to secure the human outposts on Europa. The Defiance was not alone. 5 other human vessels formed a small flotilla, each appearing tiny compared to the massive hegemony warships. But size wasn't everything in this new phase of the war. All ships report ready, Captain, said Commander Ji Lee, her second in command. Neural link systems are online. Hyun nodded. Prepare for neural engagement on my mark. She took a deep breath. Mark. She closed her eyes as the neural interface activated. A strange tingling sensation spread from the base of her skull, where the neural implant connected to her brain stem. For a moment, there was disorientation, almost like vertigo. Then suddenly, her awareness expanded. The ship wasn't just a vessel she commanded. It became an extension of her body. She could feel the thrum of the engines as if they were her own heartbeat. The sensor data didn't come as numbers and images on screens, but as direct knowledge, as intuitive as knowing where her own limbs were in space. Around her, the bridge crew had the same experience, each connecting to their specific systems. And across the flotilla, 5 other captains and their crews joined in a loose network, sharing tactical awareness without needing to communicate verbally. Neural link active, reported Ji, his voice sounding distant to Hyun's ears. She was already receiving the information directly. All crews show green status. Through her expanded awareness, Hyun could feel the hegemony ships ahead. They moved with precision, but followed predictable patterns. Their communications traveled along frequencies she could now perceive directly. Their weapon systems charged with energy signatures she could taste like different flavors. Begin attack pattern typhoon, she commanded, the thought transferring seamlessly to her crew and the other ships. The human flotilla accelerated, breaking formation in ways that would appear chaotic to outside observers. But through their neural link, every movement was coordinated with perfect precision. The hegemony ships detected the approaching human vessels and began to react, but their response seemed sluggish, as if they were moving in slow motion. By the time they fired their first weapons, the human ships had already changed position. Hyun directed her weapons officer with a mere thought, targeting a specific frequency vulnerability in the lead hegemony ship's shields. The shot struck with perfect timing, just as the shield cycled through its modulation pattern. The energy beam passed through as if the powerful defenses weren't even there, striking the ship's propulsion system. Across the battlefield, the other human vessels executed similar precision strikes. They moved with impossible coordination, reacting to hegemony maneuvers before they were fully executed. A hegemony missile salvo that should have been devastating was avoided entirely, the human ships seeming to know where the missiles would be before they arrived. Return fire struck with surgical precision, disabling weapons and engines rather than destroying the alien vessels outright. In the command center of the lead hegemony ship, confusion turned to panic as the impossible unfolded before them. How are they anticipating our every move? The hegemony captain demanded. It's like they're reading our tactical computers directly. The battle that should have lasted hours was over in 18 minutes. Not a single human vessel was lost or even seriously damaged. 2 hegemony ships were destroyed when their commanders refused to surrender and attempted desperate self-destruct maneuvers. The other 3 were captured intact, along with thousands of prisoners. Hyun disengaged from the neural link, the return to normal perception leaving her momentarily dizzy. Around her, the bridge crew was doing the same, some laughing in disbelief at what they had accomplished. Send word to Admiral Park, Hyun ordered, her voice hoarse from disuse during the neural engagement. The Battle of Europa is complete. First field test of neural link combat systems exceeded all expectations. 3 days later, in the interrogation chamber of Titan Base Alpha, Admiral Jin Park watched through one-way glass as a captured hegemony officer was questioned. The alien, a high-ranking tactical commander, had finally begun to speak after days of silence. Your species terrifies the Council, the alien admitted, its translator conveying the words in a flat tone that couldn't hide the underlying fear. Your neural plasticity, your adaptability, in 1,000 years, you would dominate the galaxy. The attack was preventative. Jin exchanged glances with Dr. Min Kim, who stood beside her. They attacked us because of what we might become. Min nodded, and in doing so, they forced us to accelerate our evolution. The neural link technology would have taken decades to develop in peacetime. Jin turned back to the window, watching the alien prisoner. Prepare Operation Hydra, she ordered. It's time to take the fight to them. Within days, the first phase of Operation Hydra began. Simultaneous strikes against multiple hegemony supply lines, using the newly proven neural link technology. Humanity was no longer just surviving. They were winning. The tide of war had turned. From his command post deep in the Himalayas, General Du Kim watched the real-time tactical display. After 9 months of occupation, the moment had finally come. Operation Thunderstrike, the reclaiming of Earth, had begun. The night sky above every major city on Earth lit up with brilliant flashes of light. Human ships, hidden for months in asteroid bases and secret lunar facilities, emerged to engage the hegemony orbital fleet. Their new weapons, quantum displacement devices, created ripples in space itself that bypassed enemy shields completely. Sector 7 is engaged, reported a young communications officer. Resistance cells in North America, Europe, and East Asia have begun simultaneous strikes on ground targets. Du nodded, his weathered face illuminated by the blue glow of the command screens. Years of military service had not prepared him for this war, but humanity was proving more resilient than anyone had imagined. "Show me the orbital battle," he ordered. The main screen shifted to a view from one of their few remaining satellites. In high Earth orbit, chaos reigned. The once orderly hegemony fleet formation had broken apart as human vessels darted between them. What the human ships lacked in size, they made up for with speed and the neural link technology that allowed their crews to react with impossible quickness. A massive hegemony dreadnought, nearly 2 kilometers long, fired its main weapon at a human cruiser. The beam should have vaporized the smaller vessel, but the cruiser seemed to anticipate the attack, moving aside a split second before the beam reached it. The human ship then fired back with a small missile-like projectile. When the projectile detonated, it didn't explode in the conventional sense. Instead, a sphere of distorted space engulfed the front section of the dreadnought. When the distortion cleared, that portion of the ship was simply gone. The metal and all its contents displaced to random points across the solar system. Colonel Young Lee entered the command center, his uniform dusty from his recent journey through the mountain tunnels. Resistance forces have taken control of ground-based defense installations in 12 major cities, he reported. They're turning the hegemony's own weapons against their ground troops. Du nodded, but kept his eyes on the orbital battle. A group of human ships had formed a wedge formation and were driving toward the hegemony flagship, an enormous vessel that had hung over what was once New York since the beginning of the occupation. "Theta Squadron is moving into position," said the tactical officer. QD weapons locked on the flagship's command center. They watched as brilliant flashes erupted across the flagship's hull. When the light faded, the mighty vessel was drifting, its lights flickering. On other screens, they could see hegemony ships breaking formation, some attempting to flee, others surrendering as human vessels surrounded them. "Main hegemony fleet is retreating," reported Young, unable to keep the triumph from his voice. A cheer went up around the command center. "Orbital defense grid is back under human control, sir." Du allowed himself a rare smile. After months of hiding, planning, and preparing, they had taken back Earth's skies in less than 6 hours. "Begin landing operations," he ordered. "It's time to take back our planet." Within days, human forces had reclaimed most major cities. The hegemony occupiers, cut off from orbital support and supply lines, fought fiercely at first, but soon surrendered in large numbers. Many had never expected the primitive humans to mount such an effective counterattack. As Earth celebrated its liberation, Admiral Jin Park directed the next phase of the war from Titan Base. The holographic display before her showed not just the Sol system now, but nearby stars as well. Human fleets, growing in number as more ships were constructed using captured hegemony technology, pushed outward. "The Alari representative has arrived," Admiral reported her aide. "They're requesting a private meeting." Jin nodded. This was the third alien species to reach out in the past week. The hegemony, which had ruled unchallenged for 2,000 years, was facing something entirely new: defeat. The Alari diplomat, a tall being with crystalline growths protruding from its head, bowed deeply as it entered. "Admiral Park," it said through its translator, "my government wishes to discuss terms of separate peace with humanity. We were not willing participants in the attack on your world." Jin studied the alien carefully. "Your ships fired on our cities." Under duress, the Alari insisted. "The hegemony threatened our homeworld. But now we see they are not invincible. We wish to be on the right side of history." Similar meetings were happening across human territory. The Nex, insectoid beings who controlled important resource worlds, offered mining rights in exchange for peace. The Vashan, mysterious energy-based life forms, offered advanced technological knowledge. As former enemies became tentative allies, the human fleet prepared for its most ambitious operation yet, the assault on Proxima Centauri, the nearest star to Sol and home to an important hegemony supply base. The Battle of Proxima Centauri lasted 3 days. Unlike the quick victory at Earth, this was a grinding struggle against entrenched defenses. But when it ended, humanity had captured its first alien star system. Standing on the observation deck of Titan Base, Jin watched the holographic representation of human fleet movements. Green arrows pushed steadily toward the hegemony core worlds. For the first time, she allowed herself to think about what victory might actually look like. Dr. Min Kim entered quietly, carrying a datapad. The scientist looked tired but satisfied. "The Thanatos protocol is ready for deployment, Admiral," he reported. "Final testing confirms the artificial singularity can be contained and dispersed safely." Jin turned to study his face. "This weapon could destroy entire worlds, Doctor." The Thanatos protocol was humanity's ultimate weapon, a device that could create a temporary, controlled black hole. Its destructive potential exceeded anything the hegemony possessed. It could, Min acknowledged, or it could end this war without further bloodshed. The hegemony understands power. We need to demonstrate that humanity possesses power they cannot match. Jin thought of Earth's cities, still rebuilding after the occupation. Of the millions who had died. Of the refugee camps and the orphan children. Then she thought of the captured hegemony worlds, whose civilian populations had surrendered without resistance, having no part in their government's decision to attack Earth. "Prepare a demonstration," she said finally. "Not against inhabited worlds. We're not them. But I want the Hegemony Council to witness what happens when they push humanity too far." "Where should we target?" Min asked. Jin studied the star map, focusing on the hegemony capital system. "There's a gas giant in the Primaris system. Uninhabited, but close enough to their capital that they'll have no choice but to witness what we can do." She turned to her communications officer. "And make sure they know it's coming. I want them to understand exactly what humanity is capable of, and exactly what we're choosing not to do." As preparations for the demonstration began, Jin looked again at the expanding territory under human control. In trying to prevent humanity from becoming a galactic power, the hegemony had accelerated that very outcome. The question now was what kind of power humanity would choose to be. Primaris, the hegemony capital world, had never known fear. For thousands of years, it had stood as the center of power in the galaxy. Its gleaming cities stretched across entire continents. Its orbital rings housed billions of beings from the ruling species. No enemy had ever threatened this world. Until today. The space around the system's outer gas giant suddenly rippled as 30 human warships appeared from faster-than-light travel. Their hulls gleamed in the distant sunlight, arranged in perfect formation against the backdrop of the massive planet's swirling storms. Each ship bore battle scars from 15 months of war, worn proudly like badges of honor. In the command center of Primaris, alarms blared. The High Council of the Hegemony gathered in their chamber, their varied alien forms showing signs of agitation. "How did they find our home system?" demanded the senior counselor, a tall being with luminous skin. "The coordinates are our most guarded secret. The defense fleet is moving to intercept," reported the military commander. "But they're maintaining distance. The humans have weapons we've never seen before." On the bridge of the flagship HSS Vengeance, Admiral Jin Park stood tall. The neural interface at the base of her skull pulsed gently, connecting her to the ship and the fleet. Through this connection, she could feel the fear emanating from the planet ahead. "Good. Fear might save lives today. Open a direct channel to the Hegemony Council," she ordered. "Make sure every communications device in the system receives this." Jin took a deep breath as the communications officer nodded, indicating the channel was open. "Attention Hegemony leadership," she began, her voice calm but firm. "For 15 months, our species has fought for its survival against your unprovoked aggression. Today, we demonstrate why that was your gravest mistake." She nodded to her weapons officer. "Activate the Thanatos devices." 5 small objects, previously undetectable to hegemony sensors, activated simultaneously around the gas giant. The effect was immediate and terrifying. The massive planet seemed to shudder, its swirling clouds collapsing inward as if pulled by an invisible force. The very fabric of space warped visibly around it. For a brief, terrible moment, a miniature black hole formed where the planet had been. Light bent around it. The gravitational sensors on every ship and planet in the system screamed warnings. Then, just as suddenly, the singularity dissipated in a controlled explosion that sent shockwaves throughout the system, but by careful design, harmed no inhabited worlds. Where the gas giant had been, there was now nothing but scattered debris. In the High Council chamber on Primaris, stunned silence reigned. The military commander was the first to speak, his voice barely a whisper. That was a controlled singularity weapon. They turned an entire planet into a black hole, then dispersed it safely. He turned to the council, his professional composure cracking. We have no defense against this. Nothing in our arsenal can match it. Jin's voice returned over the still-open channel. That was 1/5 of our Thanatos capacity. She continued into the stunned silence. We have targeted similar devices on each of your core worlds. You have 1 hour to surrender unconditionally. She closed the channel. On the bridge of the Vengeance, the crew waited in tense silence. Some had family who had died in the initial attack on Earth. Others had fought through the brutal occupation. All knew that this moment would define humanity's place in the galaxy for generations to come. Do you think they'll surrender? Asked Commander Ji Li, standing at Jin's side. Jin watched the distant lights of Primaris on the view screen. They're logical beings at their core, and they've never faced defeat before. I think they'll make the rational choice. The Hegemony Council's capitulation came in 43 minutes. The surrender was total and unconditional. After 2,000 years of unchallenged rule, the hegemony had fallen in less than an hour. 3 weeks later, representatives from former hegemony worlds gathered on the neutral ground of Titan Base to sign the Solar Accords. The massive conference room, hastily constructed for this purpose, contained beings from 37 different species. Some had been ruling members of the hegemony. Others had been subject races, dominated for centuries. Jin watched from the back of the room as diplomats finalized the terms of a new galactic constitution based on sovereignty and mutual defense. Species that had been subjugated for centuries found themselves independent for the first time, creating a power vacuum that humans were helping to stabilize. Did you ever imagine this outcome when you authorized the Neural Interface Project? Asked Dr. Min Kim, standing beside her. Jin shook her head. I was just trying to save what was left of humanity. I never thought we'd be redrawing the map of the galaxy. 1 month later, in the rebuilt city of Geneva, delegates from across known space gathered for the inaugural session of the Galactic Concordat. The United Nations building had been reconstructed, now with architectural elements representing all member species. Ambassador Ta Li, the sole survivor of the original diplomatic mission that had been betrayed, rose to address the assembly. His left arm was a prosthetic, a reminder of his narrow escape, but his voice was strong as he spoke. Humanity was pushed to the brink of extinction, he began. We responded with righteous fury and overwhelming force. But today, we choose a different path. Not conquest, as our enemies would have chosen, but cooperation. Not subjugation, but sovereignty. As Tai spoke, on view screens around the chamber, military vessels from a dozen formerly hostile species conducted joint exercises in Earth orbit. Former enemies now trained together under the Concordat banner. The galaxy will remember that humans fight with unmatched ferocity when threatened, Ta continued. But they will also know us by our capacity for mercy and reconciliation when the fighting ends. Outside the building, alien construction crews worked alongside humans, rebuilding what war had destroyed. Children played in parks where battles had once raged. In research centers around the world, scientists of multiple species worked together, combining their knowledge in ways the hegemony had always forbidden. In her office overlooking Lake Geneva, Jin Park watched the speech on her monitor. On her desk sat a small hologram, a memorial to those lost in the war. Billions had died, including many she had personally known and loved. Was it worth it? Asked General Du Kim, who had come to stand beside her desk. Jin looked out the window, where an alien child was playing with human children in the park across the street. Ask me in 100 years, she replied. But I think we've given humanity a chance at something better than mere survival. In orbit above them, the first joint human-alien deep space exploration vessel prepared for its maiden voyage. Its mission: to explore beyond the boundaries of former hegemony space, to find new life and new civilizations with a message of peace rather than conquest. Humanity had survived its trial by fire, and in doing so, had forged a new galactic order, one where Earth stood not as a subjugated world, but as the beating heart of a more just and balanced cosmic civilization. The end.